What if I told you that the modern military base, with all its technology, is essentially an invention that is over 2,000 years old? You may think of the Roman army as a force that only fought, but its real secret weapon was its ability to build. The Romans didn't just conquer territories. They brought with them a standardized, reproducible model of order, a fortified camp, or castrum. This design was so ingenious in its simplicity and effectiveness that it outlived the empire itself, becoming an eternal model for military engineers. It transformed the chaos of the wild frontiers into the orderly Roman world. Watch the video to the end to learn how Roman engineers created the perfect machine for housing and defense, and why exact replicas of it can be found all over the world even today. What if I told you that everything you believed about the Roman army wasn't entirely true? Its main strength was not only the sword, but also the shovel. We are used to thinking of legionnaires as warriors, but they were also unsurpassed builders, and their camp, the castrum, was not just a shelter, but a powerful psychological weapon. This camp was not just a collection of walls and tents. It was Rome in miniature, a portable matrix of civilization. Wherever the legion went, it immediately recreated the familiar and orderly world of Rome around itself. This ability was unique for its time and gave it a huge advantage. Imagine a legion that spent the whole day on a grueling march through hostile, wild terrain. By evening, the soldiers did not just set up a chaotic bivouac, but in a matter of hours erected an exact replica of their permanent base. Every tent in every street was in its predetermined place. This created an incredible sense of stability and security. Soldiers, thousands of kilometers from home, still felt like they were in a familiar and predictable environment. For the local tribes who watched this process, it was a real shock. Before their eyes, in the middle of nowhere, a whole fortified city with straight streets, moats, and towers grew up overnight. It was a demonstration not only of military, but also of organizational power. The Romans seemed to be saying, "We are not just guests, we are here to stay." This standardized approach completely demoralized their opponents, exposing their own disorganization. The very design of the castrum was a reflection of Roman thinking, based on order, discipline, and efficiency. The rigid rectangular grid of streets was alien to the natural landscape, literally imposing the will of man upon it. There was no room for ambiguity or chaos in this world. Every element, from the location of the gates to the commander's tent, was subject to strict logic and hierarchy. This psychology of order also worked internally. A legionnaire living in such an environment constantly felt like part of a huge, well-coordinated machine. His life was strictly regulated, and the camp itself contributed to this. He knew where to find his centurion, where to get provisions, where to run in case of alarm. This predictability reduced stress levels and increased the combat effectiveness of the units. Moreover, the castrum was not just a defensive structure, it was an active instrument of conquest. After the camp was built, the legions began to radiate Roman influence outward. They built roads, bridges, and aqueducts, bringing the entire surrounding area up to their standards. The camp was a springboard from which not only military, but also cultural assimilation began. This aspect is often overlooked, with the focus solely on military characteristics. But it was precisely this ability to standardize and reproduce order that allowed Rome to rule a vast empire. The camp was not just a place where soldiers lived. It was a symbol and instrument of power that could be instantly deployed anywhere in the known world. Over time, these temporary camps often became permanent fortresses, with entire cities growing up around them. Many modern European cities, such as Vienna, Cologne, and Manchester, grew directly out of Roman military camps. They still carry in their DNA the original rectangular structure laid down by legionnaires thousands of years ago. The versatility of this construction kit was remarkable. The same basic plan was used for both a small outpost for a few hundred people and a huge legionary base. Only the scale changed, but the principles remained unchanged. This standardization greatly simplified logistics, training, and troop management. Thus, the Roman castrum was more than just a fort. It was a philosophical and engineering masterpiece, the embodiment of the Roman spirit. It demonstrated that the true power of the empire lay not only in its ability to destroy, but above all in its unmatched ability to organize and build. This lesson in organization and order became Rome's most enduring legacy. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think was more important for Rome, military power or engineering ingenuity? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next studies. Are you ready to learn the truth about what was hidden behind the walls of the ideal Roman camp? The secret to its effectiveness lay in absolute standardization. Every castrum, regardless of its location, whether in foggy Britain or hot Syria, was built according to a single, strict plan. It was an ideal rectangular or square fortress, oriented to the cardinal points. This shape was not only convenient for defense, but also simplified the internal layout and logistics as much as possible. The basis of the entire layout was two main streets intersecting at right angles. The first, Via Principalis, or Main Street, ran across the camp. The second, Via Praetoria, connected the main gate with the center of the camp. These two arteries divided the entire territory into 4 equal quadrants, which made it possible to instantly orient oneself inside. There were always 4 gates in the camp, one on each side. The main gate, Porta Praetoria, was located on the side facing the enemy or in the direction of march. The opposite gate was called Porta Decumanus. The 2 side gates, Porta Principalis Dextra and Porta Principalis Sinistra, i.e. the right and left gates, opened onto Via Principalis. At the very heart of the camp, at the intersection of the main streets, was its administrative and spiritual center, the Principium. It was a large complex of buildings that included headquarters, an office, and a treasury. Here, in a special sanctuary, the legion standards were kept, which made this place sacred to every soldier. Next to the Principius was the Praetorium, the home of the legion commander or legate. This was often a luxurious building, constructed in the style of a city mansion or villa, with an inner courtyard, mosaic floors, and even its own heating system. This emphasized the commander's status and served as a reminder of Roman civilization, even on the wild frontiers. The rest of the camp was used for housing and infrastructure. Each of the 4 quadrants was divided into smaller rectangular sections. These housed the contubernia, or barracks, where the soldiers lived. Each barracks was a long, narrow building divided into 10 rooms, each of which housed 8 people. In addition to the barracks, other important buildings were also present in the camp. Hospitals, or valetudinaria, had a complex layout with wards, operating rooms, and corridors that provided good ventilation. They were so advanced for their time that they represented the pinnacle of ancient medical logistics. Great importance was attached to the storage of supplies, primarily grain. Special granaries called horea were built for this purpose. These buildings had a unique design with a raised floor standing on stone or wooden supports. This provided ventilation from below and protected the grain from dampness and rodents. The entire camp area was surrounded by a powerful line of fortifications. It consisted of several elements, one after the other. First came a deep moat or fossa. Immediately behind the moat, a high rampart, or agger, was built from the excavated earth. At the top of this rampart, a palisade, vallum, or in permanent fortresses, a stone wall with towers was erected. Even the space between the wall and the first buildings inside the camp, the so-called intervallum, was strictly regulated. It was a wide-open strip that ran around the entire perimeter. It protected the buildings from fire from the outside and gave the defenders room to maneuver, as well as serving as a ring road. But how did this ideal city machine cope with the chaos of the outside world? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secrets that made these walls impregnable. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Roman engineers. It's not just about the layout of the camp, but also the incredible speed and precision with which it was built. When the legion stopped for the night, not only the soldiers, but also a corps of specialist surveyors went to work. They used a tool called a gramma, which was a cross piece on a pole with plumb lines. With the help of the gramma, they marked out perfectly straight angles for future streets in a matter of minutes. This process was perfected to the point of automatism. Every legionnaire knew his maneuver. Some units immediately took up their delabras, special army pickaxes, and began digging a trench. Others chopped down trees and sharpened stakes for the palisade. Others were responsible for setting up tents in strictly designated areas. The whole process resembled a well-oiled machine where everyone was a cog. The design of the defensive structures themselves, which we often don't think about, deserves special attention. The Roman moat, or fossa, was not just a pit. It often had a specific V-shaped profile with a small square depression at the bottom, known as an ankle trench. This was done to make it more difficult for an attacker to climb out of the ditch if they fell into it. The earthen rampart, or agger, was also a complex engineering structure. It was not just a pile of earth. Soldiers laid the soil in layers, interspersing it with turf and logs. This created a strong, reinforced structure that did not crumble and could withstand the weight of the defenders and their catapults. A powerful wooden palisade was installed on top of the rampart. The genius of Roman engineering was also evident in the organization of daily life inside the camp. One of the most impressive systems was the sanitation system. In permanent fortresses, complex public toilets or latrines were built. These were long stone benches with holes under which water constantly flowed, carrying all the waste into a special sewer channel. The water supply was also up to par. If the camp became a permanent base, a full-fledged aqueduct could be built to it, delivering clean water from the surrounding hills. This water fed not only the latrines but also the baths, or thermae. The presence of baths was critical to maintaining the hygiene and morale of legionaries who spent months away from home. The design of the aforementioned Horia granaries was also unique. Their raised floors were not the only clever feature. The walls of these buildings often had buttresses, which not only strengthened the structure, but also created ventilation channels inside the walls. This allowed air to circulate around the grain, preventing it from rotting and spontaneously combusting. Even the roads inside the camp were built according to all the rules of Roman road construction. They had a multi-layered base of stones, gravel, and sand, as well as a slightly convex profile for rainwater drainage. This ensured that the streets remained passable in all weather conditions, which was critical for the rapid transfer of troops to the walls. The temporary camps, which were erected for just one night, were no less impressive. They were built from turf. Soldiers cut the turf into even bricks with special shovels and used them to build a wall, like a construction set. Such a turf wall was surprisingly strong and provided reliable protection for a short time. All this invisible work, from marking the ground to laying stones in the sewer, constituted the true genius of the Roman castrum. It was a system thought out to the smallest detail, where nothing was superfluous. It was this engineering foundation that made the camp so effective and durable. If you like how we reveal the hidden details of history, please like this video. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos with stories about the amazing achievements of ancient Rome. What if everything you've been taught about the life of a legionnaire is outdated? We often imagine their daily life as harsh and primitive, but inside the castrum there was a complex and orderly social life. The basis of this life was the smallest unit of the army, the contubernium. This was a group of 8 soldiers who lived, ate, and fought together. They shared a tent in a temporary camp or a room in permanent barracks. The barracks or contubernia were designed for maximum functionality. They were long buildings divided into 10 compartments. Each compartment consisted of 2 small rooms. The front, larger room was used to store equipment and weapons, while in the rear, smaller room, soldiers slept on bunk beds. It was a very crowded but organized life. The daily routine in the camp was strict and governed by the sound of the bugle. The soldiers rose early, followed by roll call and the distribution of daily tasks. Service in the castrum consisted of more than just military training. Soldiers were constantly engaged in construction work, repairing fortifications, cleaning weapons, and standing guard on the walls and at the gates. A huge part of their time was taken up by military exercises. For this purpose, a large area outside the camp, but close to it, was set aside as a campus or training ground. Here, the legionnaires practiced drill techniques, maneuvers, fencing, and spear throwing. These grueling workouts kept them in excellent physical shape and ensured coordination of their actions. Inside the camp, economic life was also bustling. Permanent fortresses had large workshops or factories. Skilled legionnaire craftsmen worked here. Blacksmiths who repaired weapons and armor, carpenters who made spear handles and repaired carts, as well as leather workers and masons. The camp was largely self-sufficient. The hospital, or valetudinarium, deserves a special mention. It was standard for every large fortress to have one. The architecture of these buildings was specially designed for the care of the sick. Long corridors separated the wards from each other, ensuring quiet and isolation. There were special operating rooms with good lighting and separate rooms for storing medicines. The Romans understood the importance of hygiene for maintaining the health of the army. In addition to cleanliness in hospitals, public baths, or thermae also served this purpose. Many large fortresses built their own bath complexes, which were smaller copies of city baths. Soldiers could not only wash there, but also relax and socialize, which was important for psychological relief. Food in the army was standardized and nutritious. The basis of the diet was grain, from which the soldiers themselves baked bread or cooked porridge. Vegetables, beans, meat, and cheese were added to this. The presence of horea, capable of storing a year's supply of grain, ensured that the legion would not be dependent on supply interruptions. The camp also had its own currency and economy. Soldiers received regular pay, which was kept in the treasury in Principia. They could spend part of this money in shops that eventually appeared in the camp or in the settlement next to it. This created a constant cash flow and stimulated the economy of the border regions. Thus, life in the castrum was a whole world unto itself. It was an orderly, disciplined, and largely self-sufficient organism. This world provided soldiers with everything they needed, from housing and food to medical care and leisure, in exchange for complete obedience and willingness to follow orders. How comfortable do you think such a life could have been by the standards of the time? In the next chapter, you will learn how these camps evolved from temporary tents into permanent cities. Initially, most Roman camps were temporary structures. They were built during campaigns, served as bases for the summer, and were dismantled when the cold weather set in. The walls of these camps, castra estiva, or summer camps, were most often made of turf and wood. These materials were readily available, and construction did not take long, which was ideal for mobile warfare. However, as the empire's borders stabilized, Rome needed permanent bases for its legions. Tactics changed from rapid conquest campaigns to stationary defense of long borderlines, such as Hadrian's Wall in Britain or the Rhine Limes in Germany. Temporary camps began to turn into castra stativa, permanent fortresses. This process was gradual. First, wooden watchtowers and gates were replaced with stone ones, which were stronger and more durable. Then it was the turn of barracks and administrative buildings. Eventually, the entire perimeter of the camp was surrounded by a powerful stone wall, and the internal structures were completely rebuilt in stone. It was an incredibly resource-intensive undertaking. Legions were transformed into huge construction organizations. Soldiers became masons, carpenters, and engineers. They not only built the fortress itself, but also organized all the necessary infrastructure, quarries, sawmills, brick factories, and roads for transporting materials. The famous border fortresses are an example of this transformation. For example, Diva Victrix in Britain, on the site of which the city of Chester now stands, began as a typical wooden fort, but over time was completely rebuilt in stone. Its amphitheater and the remains of its walls still amaze the imagination. Stone fortresses were the pinnacle of Roman military engineering. The walls were several meters thick and high, with powerful towers at regular intervals, and the gates were veritable small fortresses with double passages and guard rooms above. These structures were designed to withstand any siege. Changes also took place inside the fortress. Wooden barracks were replaced by stone ones, often two-story. The houses of senior officers and commanders became even more luxurious, with mosaics, frescoes, and hypocausts, a system of underfloor heating. These were no longer just barracks, but full-fledged city quarters. Such a permanent fortress became not only a military, but also an economic center of the region. It provided security, which attracted merchants, craftsmen, and settlers. The legion stationed in the fortress was a major consumer of goods and services, which gave a powerful boost to the local economy. In addition, these fortresses served as administrative centers. From the praetorium, the legate ruled not only the legion, but also the surrounding territory. Here, courts were held, taxes were collected, and decisions were made that affected the lives of entire provinces. The fortress was a visible embodiment of Roman power. The construction of such monumental structures also had a psychological purpose. A stone fortress towering over the surrounding landscape was a powerful statement about the immutability of the Roman presence. It showed everyone, friends and enemies alike, that Rome had come to these lands in earnest and for the long haul. What I am about to show you took place just beyond the closed gates, more precisely right in front of them. No Roman camp existed in a vacuum. As soon as a legion established a permanent or even semi-permanent base, a civilian settlement immediately began to grow up around its walls. These settlements, known as canabi or vicus, became an integral part of life on the frontier. Initially, canabi were simply markets and temporary structures. Their first inhabitants were merchants, market vendors who followed the army, selling soldiers goods that were not included in the standard ration, wine, delicacies, luxury items. Craftsmen also settled here, offering their services to the legionaries. Over time, these settlements grew. Despite official prohibitions during certain periods, soldiers often started unofficial families. Their wives and children settled in the cannabis, as access to the military camp itself was strictly forbidden to them. This turned temporary markets into full-fledged settlements with a permanent population. The canabi were a lively and chaotic world, the complete opposite of the strict order of the castrum. There were no straight streets or standardized buildings here. The buildings were crammed together, forming a maze of narrow streets. But it was here that real life was in full swing, with cultures and languages mixing. The economic link between the camp and the settlement was inseparable. The legion was the main employer and consumer. Soldiers spent their pay in the taverns, shops, and workshops of the canaba. In turn, the inhabitants of the canaba provided the army with fresh food, handicrafts, and various services. For veterans who had served their term, the canaba often became their new home. Having received land and Roman citizenship, they preferred to settle near their former legion. They married local women, started their own businesses, and became respected members of their new frontier society. These settlements were veritable melting pots. Here, Romans, Gauls, Germans, Syrians, and people of dozens of other nationalities lived and worked side by side. It was in the canabae that the most active Romanization took place. The local population adopted the Roman way of life, language, and customs not by force, but through everyday communication and trade. Many canabi eventually gained official status. They could become a municipality or even a colony, which gave their inhabitants certain rights and privileges. They acquired their own forums, temples, theaters, and baths, turning into full-fledged cities living in the shadow of the legionary fortress. This symbiosis of military and civilian life was the key to border stability. The fortress provided security, while the canabae ensured economic and social life. One could not exist without the other. The legion was the nucleus around which new Roman life crystallized in the conquered territories. Thus, thanks to a simple military camp, entire cities arose. London or Londinium, Vienna or Vindobona, Budapest or Aquincum. All of them began their history as modest settlements at the gates of Roman legionary fortresses. How much do you think this double life affected the soldiers themselves? In the next chapter, we will see how this Roman model outlived the empire itself. When the Western Roman Empire began to disintegrate in the 5th century, its border systems collapsed. Legions were disbanded or withdrawn, and there was no one left to maintain order in the massive stone fortresses. Many castra were abandoned and slowly fell into ruin, overgrown with grass and trees. They became ghost towns, silent monuments to a bygone era. However, the physical legacy of these structures was so powerful that it could not disappear without a trace. For the people living in the ensuing Dark Ages, these abandoned fortresses were something incomprehensible. They seemed to be the creation of giants or gods. The quality of Roman masonry and the scale of the structures surpassed anything that the new barbarian kingdoms could build. In many cases, these bones of the empire were given a second life. Local chiefs and kings quickly appreciated the defensive potential of the old Roman walls. Instead of building something new, they simply occupied the abandoned castra, using them as ready-made fortresses. The walls were patched up as best they could, and they once again served as defenses, but now for new masters. In Britain, for example, after the Romans left, The Anglo-Saxons often settled inside or near Roman forts. Many of their names still preserve the memory of this. Cities with endings such as Chester or Castor, such as Manchester or Lancaster, derive from the Latin word castra. This is a direct indication that the city grew on the site of a Roman military camp. The same thing happened in Gaul, in what is now France. Bishops and local aristocrats moved their residences under the protection of old Roman walls during turbulent times. Entire medieval cities grew up within Roman perimeters, adapting ancient buildings to new needs. The Praetorium could become a bishop's palace, and the Basilica in Principia could become a Christian church. Even if the camp was completely destroyed, its ghost often remained on the map. The straight Roman streets, Via Principalis and Via Praetoria, became the main streets of medieval cities. New houses were built along the old Roman lines because the foundations and paved roads still remained underground. This phenomenon is particularly evident in cities such as Lucca in Italy and Chichester in Britain. If you look at their maps, you can clearly see the perfect rectangle of the Roman camp, which became the skeleton on which the entire subsequent city grew. The medieval chaos of narrow streets was superimposed on the strict Roman grid, but could not completely erase it. Roman forts also served as a source of building materials. In the Middle Ages, the practice of dismantling ancient buildings flourished. Why work in a quarry when you can take ready-made, perfectly hewn stone blocks from the wall of an abandoned castrum? Many medieval churches and castles were built from recycled Roman stone. Thus, even in its period of decline, the Roman castrum continued to shape the European landscape. It served as a shelter, a source of materials, and, most importantly, an invisible blueprint for future cities. The legacy of the legionary builders proved to be more enduring than that of the legionary conquerors. Roman engineers, marking out another camp on the wild frontier, had no idea that they were laying the foundations for cities that would still exist 2,000 years later. This continuity is one of the most amazing testimonies to the effectiveness and durability of their simple but ingenious plan. With the fall of Rome and the development of medieval society, military engineering took a different path. The classical castrum, as a unified, open but protected system, gave way to the medieval castle. The castle was a fundamentally different structure. It was not a public military center, but a private fortified residence of a feudal lord. The main emphasis in the castle was on passive, vertical defense. High, thick walls, narrow loopholes, and a powerful keep were all designed to withstand a long siege with a minimal garrison. Castles were asymmetrical, adapting to the landscape, clinging to rocks and hills. There was no trace of the Roman standardized grid in them. However, the very idea of an organized military camp did not die completely. During the Crusades, when European armies once again began to conduct large-scale operations far from home, they needed to revive the skills of building fortified camps. Their camps, of course, were far from Roman perfection, but the need for them arose again. The real revival of the Roman idea came much later, during the Renaissance. With the advent and widespread use of artillery, the high medieval walls of castles became useless. Cannonballs easily pierced them, and a new type of fortification was needed. Military engineers, studying ancient texts, including the works of the Roman architect Vitruvius, rediscovered the principles of Roman military science. This led to the creation of the bastion system, or star forts. These fortresses were low and squat, with thick earthen ramparts that absorbed cannonballs. Their complex star-shaped geometry was designed to provide crossfire from cannons and leave no dead zones. At first glance, a star fort does not resemble a Roman castrum, but if we look at their internal organization, we will see familiar features. Inside the bastion perimeter were the same elements: barracks for soldiers, the commandant's house, arsenals, and supply warehouses. Most importantly, their internal layout was very often based on the same simple and effective rectangular grid. Military engineers of the Renaissance and the modern age, such as the famous Vauban in France, valued the Roman grid for the same qualities as the legionaries. It provided quick access to all areas of defense, simplified logistics and troop deployment. Straight streets allowed reserves to be quickly transferred from one flank to another. In military textbooks of the time, the Roman castrum was cited as a model to be emulated. Young officers and engineers were taught the basics of fortification, using Caesar's camps as an example. It was believed that the ideal military camp should combine Roman internal organization with modern bastion external protection. This trend continued in subsequent centuries. When European powers began to build their colonial empires, they again needed forts on foreign soil, and again they turned to the time-tested Roman model as the simplest and most effective solution. Thus, the Roman grid, temporarily forgotten in the chaos of the Middle Ages, made a triumphant return. It was reimagined and adapted to the new realities of gunpowder artillery, but its essence, order, efficiency, and standardization, remained unchanged. The Roman castrum proved its viability over the centuries. It showed that the basic principles of organizing space for military needs, discovered by the legionaries, are universal. They work regardless of whether the camp is defended by swords or cannons. When European colonists arrived in America, they found themselves in a situation very similar to that of the Romans on the borders of their empire. They were surrounded by vast, unknown, and potentially hostile territories. It was vital for them to establish safe and well-organized strongholds, and without consulting each other, they turned to the same form as the Romans. The Spanish used a classic rectangular layout when building their presidios, military posts on the border of New Spain. The Presidio of San Agustin in Florida and the Presidio in San Francisco were originally simple quadrangular forts. Inside, along the perimeter of the walls, were barracks, warehouses, and a chapel, with a parade ground in the center. British and French colonists in North America did the same. Their forts, built to defend against Indian tribes or each other during the colonial wars, were essentially Roman castra built of wood. Fort Ticonderoga, or Fort William Henry, all of them had a clear geometric, often rectangular shape. But the most striking revival of the Roman model occurred during the U.S. expansion westward in the 19th century. As the U.S. Army advanced deeper into the continent, it built a line of forts to protect settlers and trade routes. These forts, which became icons of the Wild West, were direct descendants of the Roman castrum. Take, for example, Fort Laramie in Wyoming. It began as a private trading post, but after it was purchased by the Army, it was rebuilt according to a standard military model. It had a clear rectangular perimeter, inside which were barracks, officers' quarters, warehouses, a hospital, and a bakery, built around a central parade ground. The reason for this choice was the same as that of the Romans: efficiency. A rectangular grid was the simplest and quickest way to organize space. It was easy to lay out on any flat terrain, easy to build using standard plans, and easy to defend. Soldiers arriving at a new fort intuitively understood where everything was located. The commander could easily control the entire territory from the central parade ground. This standardization was critical for an army that operated over vast distances and with limited resources. These forts, like their Roman predecessors, were not just military installations. They were centers of civilization in the middle of the wilderness. They served as post stations, administrative centers, shelters for caravans, and places for negotiations with Indian tribes. Civilian settlements sprang up around them, just as they did around Roman castra. Traders, trappers, laundresses, and saloons created a lively and bustling world that was completely dependent on the garrison. Many modern cities in the American West grew out of these army forts. Thus, a Roman legionnaire transported by a time machine to the American frontier of the 19th century would be surprised to find himself in a completely familiar environment. He would immediately understand the logic of Fort Laramie, because it was the same logic he used to build his own camps somewhere on the Rhine or Danube. This striking coincidence proves that the Romans stumbled upon a fundamental, universal design. They created an archetype of a military settlement that proved so successful that it continued to be copied thousands of years later on the other side of the world, without even always realizing where this plan actually came from. At first glance, a modern military base filled with radars, satellite antennas, and hangars for equipment has nothing in common with an ancient Roman camp. However, if we put aside technology and look at the basic structure, the similarity is simply striking. The Roman castrum is still alive today. It has simply replaced the wooden palisade with a chain-link fence. Open a satellite map of any large military base, be it Camp Pendleton in the US, Ramstein Air Base in Germany, or any other. The first thing that catches your eye is the clear, guarded perimeter. Like the castrum, The modern base has strictly controlled access points, the main gate or checkpoint. Inside this perimeter, we see not chaotic development, but a familiar rectangular grid of streets. The streets have names, often in military style, but their function is the same as that of the Via Principalis, to ensure fast and efficient logistics, the movement of personnel and equipment from one point to another. The command center of a modern base is a direct analog of the Roman Principium. Just as 2,000 years ago, the headquarters building houses the command, communications nodes, and important documents and symbols of the unit. The residence of the base commander, although not called the Praetorium, is still a separate, prestigious building. The areas inside the base are strictly separated, as in the castrum. There is a residential area with barracks for enlisted personnel and separate houses for officers and their families. There is an administrative area with headquarters and offices. There is a huge logistics area with warehouses, workshops, and garages, a direct descendant of Roman factories in Horea. The presence of a hospital on the base is a standard established by the Roman valetudinaria. Modern military hospitals are, of course, a miracle of medicine, but the very idea that a military unit should have its own well-organized medical center comes straight from Rome. The huge parade grounds and sports facilities at modern bases serve the same function as the campus outside the walls of the castrum. These are places for training, keeping fit, and holding military ceremonies, which are so important for maintaining discipline and camaraderie. Even the economic life around the bases follows the Roman model. Outside the gates of modern bases, entire towns have sprung up, living off servicing the garrison. Bars, restaurants, shops, and rental housing, all of these are modern cannabia, whose economic pulse depends entirely on their military neighbor. The reason for this striking continuity is simple. The tasks facing the military have not changed in essence. Armies still need somewhere to live, train, store supplies, repair equipment, and manage all these processes, and the rectangular, zoned grid invented by the Romans remains the most efficient and logical way to organize space for all these tasks. The Roman Empire is long gone, its legions disbanded, and the languages they spoke are dead. But its engineering genius, embodied in the simple and ingenious design of the military camp, has proven immortal. Every time a new military base is built in the world, engineers, without knowing it, pay tribute to their nameless colleagues in Roman sandals. We can see that the Roman castrum was not just a fort, it was a modular, standardized system, an ingenious construction set that allowed Rome to quickly and effectively establish control over vast territories. From the psychology of order, it conveyed to specific engineering solutions such as ventilated barns or sanitation systems. Everything about it was subject to logic and efficiency. This plan proved so successful that its basic structure, a rectangular perimeter, a grid of streets and functional zoning, has survived for millennia. It was used by medieval city builders, Renaissance engineers, New World colonizers, and modern military base designers. The Roman camp became one of the empire's most enduring inventions. It outlived the empire itself because it solved the fundamental problems of space organization, security, and logistics better than any other plan. This quiet but persistent legacy proves that sometimes a shovel and a surveyor's instrument can leave a deeper mark on history than a sword. What do you think about other engineering or social inventions of antiquity that you believe still influence our lives today? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the past that explains our present.